Okay, well, greetings, Windsor Community Church, or perhaps I should say, Suicidai, Tengokania, Wakru Nekru, Grukomwil. This is Kroma. Has anyone seen one of these before? It's not a normal scarf. This is the Cambodian national garment and one of its national icons. But I don't think it's, very rarely is it ever seen with a jersey or with wool at all, I'd imagine. And the reason for that is in Cambodia, where our family has been living for the last 2 years, it rarely gets below 25 degrees, even at nighttime in the cold season. It can get up to the mid-40s in the hot season. So our move to Invercargill has been fantastic. We're living with Peter and Helen at the manse there, but it has been a bit chilly. So, yeah. But I will take this off because actually it's a bit hot today in here. So. But despite the weather, we're very glad to be here and share about Cambodia and our work there over the last 2 years. And especially since we know that this church has upheld us in prayer. We know that there are people here in this church that support us. The APW has been very good to us, and so has the church. So what we share today about what we have done in Cambodia and what God has led us through in Cambodia is in a very real way part of a ministry of this church as well. So before we start, we want to thank you guys for that. Now, I'll flick this through. So that's us. Now you might wonder in that picture here why the doctor is the only one not wearing a mask. And that is because that photo was taken just before the other guys got on a plane to fly to New Zealand. And that was the last that I saw them for 5 months. I stayed behind in Cambodia to carry on working there. And the reason that they were leaving was because we had a surprise pregnancy, and it was right at the beginning of the COVID period. So you also might wonder why the doctor had a surprise pregnancy. I don't have any answer for that one, so. On the other side, you'll see a picture of our house, where we lived for the 2 years. And those are our kids without the masks, although I'm sure you've seen them running around here. Now that house, just out of interest, is not much wider than that picture shows. The houses in our street were 4 meters wide, and they just stacked them high. So it was 3 levels, 4 meters wide, and about 200 houses all connected together in a row. So that's where we lived for 2 years in Cambodia. What I'd like to do is show you a video clip of what we got up to in Cambodia, of what life is like in Cambodia. It's about 5 minutes long, but it's a really good summary of what we got up to. And then Judy's going to get up and talk a little bit about Cambodia, and then I'll get up again and say a bit about what I specifically did over there. Can you guys hear me okay? Do I need to be a bit... Okay, good.
sure exactly which one I'm supposed to push. I just thought I should start by just correcting Simon for his greeting. He's much better at Khmer than I am. But for church, you'd never say Sosade. It's almost like saying g'day. You'd say Chamrit Sor, which is a very formal way of greeting a church. But so yeah, that was just a video of a summary of our last 2 years in Cambodia, and it took quite a long time to go through the footage that we had because, how do you condense 2 years down to 5 minutes? But that was our best effort there. I'm going to give a little rundown about Cambodia and a little snippets of our life before I hand back to Simon. So this here is obviously a map of Cambodia, and it places it there within the context of the rest of Southeast Asia. So it borders Thailand and Vietnam and Laos. And it's actually quite a small country land-wise, smaller than New Zealand, but it has about 16 million people in it. And while we're living there, I actually felt quite rural. So Phnom Penh has about 2 million people in it, so similar to Auckland. But then I realised when we were driving last week between Manapuri and Invercargill that actually New Zealand really is a lot more rural than what we experience in Cambodia. But we are in Cambodia with OMF, who are the Overseas Missionary Fellowship, and we have workers all throughout the country. So this map doesn't show where Phnom Penh is, but Phnom Penh's roughly around there. And we've got workers, throughout most of the country there. Now, Cambodia is majority rural, as I said, and I just love these snapshots as they give a little bit of a glimpse into what rural life in Cambodia is like. So you'll see the blue house there on stilts, and what that is designed for, multi-purpose, so that during the rainy season, when there's flooding, everyone can go upstairs and stay dry. But in the hot season, when Simon says it gets up to about 40 degrees, they use the downstairs bit as a cool, shady area to do their cooking and lying around in hammocks. And this picture on the left, this lady here with the kroma on, she's actually an OMF missionary that's been there about 20 years, and I'm just always blown away by this woman. But in particular, here she's at a youth group camp cooking breakfast for the youth group, and it's fried eggs over an open fire. So don't know that I could do that, but really admire her. We, of course, didn't live in the countryside. We lived in the capital of Cambodia, which is Phnom Penh. And just a few snapshots there. The top one is a typical traffic scene. So most families would get around on a tuk-tuk, including our family. So you would have seen in the video a picture of Simon about to do the school run with 2 kids on his motorbike. And 3 days a week he would sometimes have all 3 kids on his motorbike. Going through, thankfully, traffic not quite so bad with our kids on the back. But yeah, it was a bit funny. The other day we were picking up our kids from school just at Windsor North, and Joel saw another dad picking up a kid on the back of their motorbike, and he said, Mum, look, they're Cambodian. And so he's got this strong association, of course, that anyone riding with a kid on the back of their motorbike has to be a Cambodian person. And as you'll see Bethy there, she is standing on our street in our neighbourhood there, and we lived in a Khmer middle-class neighbourhood, and as you can see, houses are all stacked there, sandwiched together. We shared a wall with neighbours on either side, and we could hear them, and they could most definitely hear us through our nice paper-thin walls there. But it just gave us an amazing opportunity to really get a feel of how Khmer people live, and we got to know some amazing families, particularly a family directly across the road from us that the wife was Christian, but she was a widower with 2 young kids who lived with her Buddhist parents, and they just really took us in. And often we might lose Joel occasionally, I don't know if we should admit that, and we'd often find him across at that neighbour's house because they had a television, and he'd be sitting there in front of the television, and Grandma would be feeding him rice, and he would be having the time of his life over there. That was his favourite house in the neighbourhood. Cambodia, though, is a country of extremes. You'll see on the left-hand side, they have one big mall in Cambodia that would rival anything that we see here in New Zealand. The first time we visited, we were absolutely blown away. This place is like a theme park on the top level with like rides, the miniature ride version of what you might see at Rainbow's End. And then down the bottom, you can see, I think, is that a Lamborghini, Simon? It's like a Lamborghini, like a flash sports car just parked outside a local cafe. And the funny thing is, though, that the roads in Phnom Penh are so terrible and full of potholes, there is no way you could get above maybe 50 kilometres per hour. So that sort of car is really just a status symbol to show how rich that particular person is. And then in contrast, you have people living over open sewers, which is that picture there of the black water. And we had one of those streams running almost parallel to the kids' school that would have to drive past every day, and has those special kind of smells that you can imagine. And then pictures, these little kids in the cart, the appearance are rubbish collectors. So they're almost amongst the poorest of the poor. And they walk around the streets of Phnom Penh in all weather, just picking up recyclable materials. And you often see mums with little toddlers kind of perched up on top of piles of cardboard and plastic. And they just spend really long hours, like 12 hours a day, trekking the streets, trying to find things, and they make maybe $1 a day from all their hard work. So yeah, there's these real extremes, particularly in Phnom Penh. Now, I'll just give a really brief history of Cambodia, and the reason I like to do this is because it is still so relevant for how Cambodians live today. The first picture is a picture of Angkor Wat, and Angkor Wat is the biggest religious complex, memorial or monument in the world, and it was originally built by Hindus that had come from India. So traditionally, Cambodia was an animist country first, so a lot of spirit worship. Then it had this period of Hinduism, and today it is predominantly Buddhist. But as we found when we were living there, that this Buddhism is more of just an overlay, and you don't have to scratch very deep before you find out that Hinduism and animism is actually still very much a part of everyday life for Cambodians. And the other picture is of the killing fields. So some of you might know about the history of Cambodia, that during the late 1974 to 79, the Khmer Rouge overran the country, and there was mass genocide, and about 2 million people were killed. And that still has a huge impact on society in Cambodia today. So Cambodia today, religious-wise, the scarecrow-looking guy on the very right-hand side started popping up around the beginning of the year, and we found out that he's a scarecrow to scare away the COVID spirit. And then there are also, that's Micah standing in one of our local Buddhist wats, just having a look. But when you visit like your local dairy type shop, there'll always be like a spirit house in the middle of the shop where they have incense burning and maybe a cup of coffee, and around Chinese New Year there might be a whole roasted pig there. And we always had this sort of challenge because Joel is a curious 2-year-old, 3-year-old, would find these things really colourful and really attractive and want to start picking bits off it. So we kind of thought maybe he's a little bit of a idol destroyer or something like that was the nickname that we wanted to give him. But it was also funny, we didn't realise how much our kids had picked up on this sort of thing. And so last weekend we were in Waikaka at the church there, and that's where my grandparents are buried. So we went to visit the cemetery there, and Beth was walking along and she saw this grave with this tiny little house replica on it, and she said, "Oh, Mum, look, there's that spirit house there, so they can make the offerings to that person." And I thought, oh, yeah, there you go, that's the Cambodian influence there, and obviously explaining to her that, no, it wasn't a spirit house for that family, but just a memorial. The picture up the top left-hand corner, the result, I guess, of Khmer Rouge was that the country was decimated. Economy was gone. They killed all of their professionals off, doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers. And in the last 10 years, they have, 20 years maybe, there's been a lot of overseas investment as Cambodia has sought to rebuild the country, and that particular town used to be a quiet little country coastal town where all the missionaries used to go on holiday. But in the last 10 years, they've received massive Chinese investment because Chinese tourists needed a place to gamble. So most of those buildings are related to the gambling industry, which has massively impacted the local community in that area, just as you can imagine, the sort of other vices that might come along with a whole town that's been transformed into a gambling mecca. And then the very bottom picture of the ladies sitting outside, and this is something that I guess is a real soft point in my heart, and I feel is just a real product of the brokenness and the ongoing trauma that's in Cambodian society. And this is just a group of young ladies sitting outside what they call a KTV club. So it's called a karaoke club, but in reality it's a brothel. And you see, when I go across town to this language club that I help out with, I have to go down this stretch of the street where there's about 80 brothels lining the street, filled with young girls that are barely teenagers, all on their cell phones, just waiting for customers. And it's just this really heartbreaking scene, because you realise that Cambodia is actually a really conservative society. So you would never ever live with your partner before being married. Having a child out of wedlock is something that's really, really shameful, and it doesn't just bring shame on yourself, but on your whole entire family. Yet, for some reason, society, like in the last, I'm sure prostitution has always been around, but now it's an accepted part of society that in a married relationship, you can have a girlfriend and visit these places, and it's just part of regular life. So there's lots of areas in society where I think that what happened during the Khmer Rouge and the family unit being broken up is just still felt today. Moving on, I guess, from that to the church in Cambodia, we attended 2 churches while we were there. One was an international English-speaking church that we'd go to in the evenings that had a Sunday school that our kids could understand, and in the mornings, though, we would go to a local Cambodian church. And so this is actually a picture of the church building. And this down here is Sunday school for the kids, which was completely in Khmer, which is the Cambodian language. So I'd go along with the kids and try my best to translate, which I wasn't that great at, but we tried to piece things together. And this is Joel at the creche. So they didn't really have a creche, so he just got to play right beside the busy main road there with his friends. But they had a nice big gate there that was mostly childproof. It did actually have one missing rung, and Joel's favourite thing to do was sneak through the little gap in the gate to freak me out, as he liked to run towards the traffic, but I was always keeping an eye on him. But our impression of the church in Cambodia is around 30 years old. So during the Khmer Rouge, the small number of Christians that there were targeted, and a lot of them were executed or died during that time. And then during the next 10-year period, when a lot of Cambodians were in refugee camps in Thailand, there were missionaries working with them, and a small church began to arise. Then in the 1990s, the country opened up again, and missionaries were allowed back in, and the church began. But what we kind of felt was that the church is still really, really young, and that one of the biggest needs apart from evangelism is discipleship, as the Cambodian church just tries to figure out what it means to be a Cambodian Christian, in particular incorporating parts of their culture that are really important to them into how you live life as a Christian. So 2 interesting kind of stories from that observation. One was we attended this church, and we were there over Christmas, and they celebrated Christmas and almost took like a month or 2 months and had lots of services around Christmas. And then we got to Easter, and there was nothing. No mention of Easter, no celebrations, and we were kind of like, what's going on? And we talked to one of the older missionaries that's been there a long time, and she was like, you know what, I think they just forgot, because at the same time as Easter is this really important Cambodian cultural holiday, one of like, kind of almost like their Christmas. And she thought the cultural holiday was more important than the celebration of Easter to the church. And it was kind of just this really interesting tension between, does it really matter at what time of year you celebrate Easter? Does it have to be on the calendar time that we might, as a Western church, celebrate Easter, or can they move it so that it doesn't conflict with this Cambodian holiday? And then the second observation that I found really fascinating was, as part of our training, we get to do a lot of cultural experiences, and one was going along to a Cambodian ministry that had just been started to bring back traditional Cambodian instruments into the church. And so historically, the traditional Cambodian instruments were very related to the spiritual world. So these musicians who were trained for years and years will call on different spirits to embody them as they play this instrument. And when these people started to become Christians and realise the difference between, these dark spiritual forces that they were calling in to help them play these instruments, they realised that they didn't want this in their Christian church. And so they put aside all traditional Cambodian music and traditional Cambodian instruments. And when you go along to many Cambodian churches, you'll see the guitar or the electric piano, but not the traditional Cambodian music, which is really important part of their culture. And what this ministry had, through a number of years, come to the conclusion that, maybe we can redeem these instruments. Maybe we can write Christian music and play it with these instruments. And instead of calling on these spirits to fill us when we want to play these instruments, recognise that we're playing these for the glory of God. And they also worked with Cambodian ballet, which traditionally tells a lot of stories, once again, with a really big spiritual element to it. And then their journey through realising we can actually create new dance moves to tell the Christian story and present the gospel message. So I thought that was really cool to kind of see the church realising that, we can claw back parts of the Cambodian tradition as we go forward and explore, what it means to be a Cambodian Christian. And I'll pass it, back to Simon.
So this is the OMF missionary team, who, along with some other missionaries in Phnom Penh, I was the GP for. So my main work there was being the GP for missionaries, to try and help them stay on the field, help them negotiate healthcare in a Cambodian context. And this part of my work there was much like what a GP would do here in New Zealand, but with the added extra of tropical diseases. So we had a dengue epidemic in the first year I was there. There was more than 10 times the amount of dengue there ever has been in Cambodia. And out of this group of people here, 7 of them got dengue in that 1 year. Dengue fever is a mosquito-borne illness that you can get that causes really bad aches, pains, sometimes causes you to bleed internally as well. So, and it can be fatal. So we had 6 of these people actually in hospital with that in the first year. The 7th was Bethany, and we managed to keep her at home. She didn't need to go to hospital. But yeah, it was a big year for that tropical disease in our first year there. One of the big differences in my work over in Cambodia was that the health system, again, basically is less than 30 years old. The Khmer Rouge went through and they killed all the educated people, basically. So there was only a handful of doctors left, a handful of lawyers left in the country after that period of time. And so they've had to rebuild the system of medicine over the last 30-odd years. So it's still, again, like the church, it's a very young, a very immature system where things don't really connect well together. So, negotiating that and helping these people have good health care in that context was a challenge. So I'd have to accompany these guys to hospital just to make sure that they got appropriate treatment, appropriate medications, if they do need, if it was something that I couldn't immediately deal with. And sometimes when Cambodians would go to the doctors, they wouldn't be, well, most of the time, they wouldn't be told what was wrong with them. And they'd just get a bag of pills without any name of the medicine, without any prescription, just a bag of pills. Take 1 or 2 of these a day. And you wouldn't know what the pills were or what was actually wrong with the person. So yes, because I was a doctor, I could go there and have a conversation with them, and they'd respect that, and we could get reasonably good healthcare for these guys. But my favourite part of my work over in Cambodia was with these young doctors here. These young doctors here. This is the Cambodian Christian Medical Fellowship. So there's about 30 young Cambodian doctors who are Christians, which is fantastic. And over about a 10-year period, there's been a series of missionaries who have helped facilitate these guys meeting together, doing Bible teaching, doing medical teaching, and just trying to encourage them in the faith and in medicine and how you treat patients and things like that. So my favorite part of my work there was getting alongside these guys, discipling these guys, teaching these guys, and it was absolutely fantastic. And what I'm very thankful for is right now they're on their own without a missionary doctor at all. There's no missionary doctor over there that's looking after them. And this is the first time for them, and they're continuing to meet regularly and encourage one another and taking on teaching themselves, which is absolutely fantastic, because when I left I was a little bit worried about what would happen with this group of doctors. Will they just disperse, or will they continue meeting together to talk about what it means to be a Christian doctor, what it means to try and affect the country through Christ in your work? And these guys are doing it, so I'm really happy about that. The other thing with these people here is I think all of them were first-generation Christians. So again, that speaks to how young the church is in Cambodia. And to be a first-generation Christian is a difficult thing in Cambodia. Often it means your family cuts you off. You know, you can't go to the village and do the spiritual activities that you need to at certain times of year that go along with the religion that they have there. At medical school, it's difficult for them to get good grades because sometimes good grades come at a price. And your bosses often won't promote you if they know that you're different or if you're Christian. So that's what these guys were telling me. So it's cost them a lot to be a Christian, yet they are. So I have utmost respect for them, and it's fantastic to work with these guys. A few shots of a couple of other things that we did. So this one on the left is with that Christian group of Cambodian doctors, organised a couple of times, organised some outreaches to some villages where there is no medical care. And we went along as a group and just did some basic medicine with the locals there. And don't show the Dental Council of New Zealand, because I'm not a dentist. But I was involved in a few dental clinics as well, on the right. We had a couple of dentists in OMF who led that, and I went along to help them out, seeing as they had some form of healthcare training. Although doctors, don't ask a doctor to look in your mouth, okay? You know, go to a dentist first. That's one piece of advice. And the last major part of my work there was at the cleft palate clinic at the National Paediatric Hospital. Again, it was led by one of the dentists that work with OMF, but I provided general paediatric care to the babies that have cleft palate. Often babies with cleft palate will have other associated problems like congenital heart issues or kidney issues or pneumonias and things. So I was trying to pick those things up and get them treated before these kids go for the cleft palate surgeries. So we do this one day a week. This lady here, this nurse, is Chana, and she was a Christian nurse that worked with me to help translate, and part of my role was teaching her to take over the clinic when I left. And again, first-generation Christian in her early 20s. And I remember this one story really well. We had a baby brought into us with cleft palate who was blue and hardly breathing, and the parent didn't really recognize that this baby was, very close to death. And I've never had a baby brought to me like that in New Zealand as a general practitioner. People would know to go to the hospital a lot sooner than this. So this baby was, very close to death and brought into our clinic here. And so very quickly realized that this kid is unwell, probably a heart issue, and me and Chana carried the baby to the emergency department. But I listened and heard what Chana was saying to the mum as she was walking with the baby to the emergency department. And she was sharing the gospel, and she was saying, we need to pray to Jesus for your baby. And I was just thinking, that is awesome. Like this, at the time of desperate need, this nurse, Chana, was depending on what she knew to be real, the love and care and power of Christ. So this baby ended up being okay. It needed emergency surgery on its heart. And this is the picture of the mother bringing the baby back in about 3 or 4 months later after it was discharged from hospital to say thank you to us. So I know that those words that Chana spoke to her, to the mum at that time, will stick with her, and I hope will grow into faith. So yes, she's now running the clinic on her own. She was very nervous about that. So if you do want something to pray for the Christian nurse Chana at the National Pediatric Hospital in Cambodia, that she'll be able to cope with what comes in. This is something Judy and I both did, which was try and learn the language over there. This is Khmer, and the headline there says Pisa Khmer, which is language of Cambodians, it means, the Khmer language. And I've had some people tell me it looks like noodles have been dropped on a plate. So that's me eating noodles, trying to study the noodle language, as people would say. But it does make sense, although just as an example, up here, these are all vowels. They're not all the vowels either. There's more vowels than this. Each vowel has 2 different sounds depending on which type of consonant it's paired with. The consonant can be in the middle of the vowel, can be before the vowel, can be under the vowel, can have the vowel over and under it, or can be after the vowel, or a combination of all the above. So it's quite a complex system with lots of sounds that we would not be able to differentiate in New Zealand. But oh yeah, and there's no. This is for newbies like us, so they have some space between words. But usually there's no spaces between the words, so they all run together. So you just have to know that this is a word and it ends here. Anyway, so that was a struggle, but Judy and I tried to persevere. And we need to do some Cambodian language while we're in New Zealand, because we do want to go back to Cambodia in July next year. So if anybody knows any Khmer people, come and talk to us. any Khmer people in Invercargill. Now I'm going to read this part because it took me a while to articulate what I wanted to here, but I just wanted to say something about how we were changed rather than what we did as well. And I know when we look at pictures and videos like this, it can seem that we had a bit of an adventure and it was all fun and happiness, because that's the nature of pictures. You take the best ones. But the reality was that it was quite a rough time for us over there. There was so much to process. A new team of people to work with who come from all sorts of different cultures. OMF is very multicultural. A lot of Japanese, a lot of Singaporeans, a lot of South Koreans, people from Germany, people from the UK, people from America. Someone's coming to the Cambodia field from Brazil, so all sorts of different cultures to learn how to work with. We had to deal with an incomprehensible language, strange foods, new ways of doing things, and suicidal traffic. And in a way, for us, we felt that we became toddlers again. as we struggled with communication and daily basic tasks. And I remember the immense effort that it took just to find food for the family that everyone would eat, or how hard it was for me to get a gas bottle replacement to my house, or how difficult it was to haul our kids across the city in a tuk-tuk when you have to haggle and figure out the language with the driver and they take you in the wrong direction and we don't know where we're going. All these simple things in New Zealand, these would be simple, became difficult for us. So it was like we became toddlers again. Nothing was easy. And as we struggled with our own competence to live life in this new world, we came to realize how much our identity is tied up with the independence that's been cultivated by us having professional jobs, successful lives, being independent in New Zealand. And it was a very humbling thing to find ourselves asking the question, if we are not the capable, self-sufficient people we thought we were, who are we? But I thought I knew one thing. I thought that when I started this was in the first 6 months. The first 6 months I just did language study. I didn't do any medical work. But I thought when I started my medical work, I would be the expert who helps others, who fixes problems, and that would restore, my identity. But as it turned out, in the first year of my working as a doctor there, I was confronted with a very high number of difficult medical decisions and medical issues, the death of one of our co-workers, many team members being physically, emotionally, and mentally in pain. And during this period, I often struggled to be of any help in a difficult-to-navigate healthcare context in Cambodia. It's very hard being taken out of the context you know and plonked in a new one where you have to figure everything out and the system isn't there. So through the events and experiences of these last 3 years, I think we've realized that there's a difference between helping and serving. And when I first arrived, I wanted to help God and the team in the sense that I wanted to offer my capable self to add to what God was doing in Cambodia and to add to the lives of my teammates. But the events that unfolded put us in a position where I don't think we had much of our own reserves to give out of. And instead, I think God has led us a little in understanding what serving in a humble way means. If we're humbled and needy, so that, yes, for us to be of use, we didn't have anything. We had to rely on God's sustenance and his direction. So this change from wanting to help to being led to serve has been a real mindset change for me personally. And I think that these verses here in Philippians 2, 5 to 8, sorry, I didn't include the last two verses, speak of this mindset change and that Christ experienced a similar thing, and that for us to serve with the mindset of Christ in a humble way, he led us through some of those things to be able to do that. So Philippians 2, 5 to 8 says, "Have this in mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross." So try to articulate some of our feelings there, but please pray that God will continue to teach us to serve in greater Christ-likeness, not from our own reserves, which are often little, but from his sustenance. This little boy, this is my favorite photo from Cambodia. There's not a great story attached to it, but it's just a great photo. This little boy is one of the kids that came along to our Christmas outreach that we did, and you would have seen that in the video where we had all our neighbours come. We had a Khmer person share the gospel. We did a Christmas nativity play. We got to talk to our neighbours, and it was the first time the neighbours really all came out and got to know us and broke down a lot of barriers. So that was fantastic. But that's what we want to see. We want to see kids and families affected and changed by Christ, or at least having the seed planted so that it may grow. So please pray that many people will hear and receive the good news of Christ in Cambodia. Please pray for the team, OMF team and other missionaries who are now on their own without a doctor, that God will sustain them and help them. And pray that Cambodia, as it's currently experiencing massive flooding. I haven't got any pictures of them, but I've seen them on the internet. It's really bad at the moment. To make it worse, the garbage official garbage people went on strike. So there was a whole bunch of garbage and then flooding. So we've got garbage floating all around the flooding around the city at the moment. And pray for our family as well as we welcome baby number 4 in early December, and that God will lead us and provide for us as we look to return to Cambodia in July 2021. Thanks very much.